Hey there, it's Ben Halsall here, and here in this tutorial we're going to have a look at the Pixel Film Studio Surface Tracker. Now we're going to have a look at a few different types of objects. We're going to have a look at how we can place things like logos or video onto those objects. Then we'll kind of do a quick run through of how we can actually kind of set this up in the Surface Tracker from Pixel Film Studios. So we're going to dive into Final Cut Pro now and have a look at how the Surface Tracker can map onto these different types of objects. So we'll have a look at the ball for a kind of more solid object, and then also some more cloth-like surfaces like the mesh bag, and that type of thing. So we're going to jump in here and have a look at a few different objects that we can surface track. So basically we have this coaster. We're going to kind of place a video in that. We have a water polo ball, which we're going to place a video in as well. And then we have this bag, which I picked basically because it has this kind of nice texture to it. And also because if you are looking to brand any clothing or you want to test out what your designs would look like on clothing or kind of material like this, I thought this would be a useful example to kind of run through. So we're going to start with our coaster here. And basically what I want to do is place a video of me sipping a cup of coffee in this. So we're going to come up to my XA20 footage here. One of the keys with this is we need to actually export out a video with transparency so that we can then place it on the coaster. So I'm just going to come up to my videos here, and in this first video I believe I take a sip of tea right at the beginning. We're just going to use this short section of video so you can see I'm just going to mark an in point here. Our clip here is only 2 or 3 seconds long, so basically we'll drop this down to the timeline, and then I think 2 or 3 seconds probably me having a sip, but we'll let it run for a little bit longer. So I'm going to delete that and drop the sound down. So basically what's going to happen here is we're going to create a clip that keeps the alpha channel in it. I'm going to come to my effects across on the right hand side before we even get into the tracking and stuff like that, and we are going to grab a mask, and we're going to grab a shape mask, drop it onto our video here, and this is going to allow us to basically transition to transparency at the edge of our video, but I want to keep it in that kind of circular format, so the same as the kind of coaster that we're working with. So we'll set the size of this actually a little bit smaller, and then we'll have a nice kind of big fade on it. So a couple of things with this: we're fading to transparent, but we also have this kind of nice black background to the being freelance coaster that I've chosen here. And basically we're going to export this out now. We've got 7 seconds of footage, that's easily enough, and then we'll look at the tracking. So if we first of all just click on our timeline, I'm just going to tap the X key, which you can see when I tap it actually changes the way that clip is selected. So we can select it with the selection tool, but when we tap X it's actually selecting that range, which means that now when I come to export it out or to share it and share the master file, I have this option under the settings, under video and audio, to export it out as Apple ProRes 4444, which will keep the alpha channel within there. So I'm going to press next here, and we've got an export already of this, but I'm going to save a new one out. So essentially now we have that video with the alpha channel of me taking a sip of tea. And I've already imported a version of this into Final Cut Pro, so we don't need to import that again. In fact, I can just delete it from the timeline, and we'll come back to the beginning here. So now let's get into the tracking here. Now there's 2 ways we can bring up the Surface Tracker. One is in our effects across on the right. So if I come across to the right hand side here, you can see, I'll stretch this out a little bit so we can see the name. So we have the Surface Tracker here. And when we use the Surface Tracker here, basically we can drag this down onto our clip, and it will keep the Surface Tracker on that same clip. And we'll look at the second way of doing it a little bit later on. So now I'm going to come up to my inspector at the top right. If you don't see your inspector, just come to Window, Show in Workspace, and make sure your inspector is checked, and that will bring the inspector up. And then we're going to, first of all, with it selected, open up the Surface Tracker editor. So once we're in here, we're basically looking to select an area of this coaster. So I'm going to just come to where it's kind of nice and flat here, and we are going to grab the ellipse tool. Makes sense, it's an ellipse. And what that means is, rather than using the pen, which allows us to kind of select points manually, we can just drag an ellipse around, and you can see it's kind of placing these tracking points all across our shape here. So basically now what I'm going to do, before we go ahead, we're just going to have a look at some of these options down here. So basically we have a few options down here, such as the track amount, the search window, and the jiggle threshold. And we need to modify these a little bit. These kind of help you to improve the kind of tracking. So if I increase the amount of this, it's going to find those edges a little bit better here. And then I'm going to increase the search window, and we'll increase the jiggle threshold, which just means that these points are allowed to move a little bit more. So somewhere between 100 and 200 seem to work pretty well. And then we're going to track backwards first of all. So we just press the track backwards button up here. And basically what you can see is it's tracking and finding those edges and then kind of tracking back. And then you can see when we move this forward, our track looks pretty good so far. Everything's kind of moving nicely with our coaster. I'm going to come to the last point here and then we'll track forward. There's a bit more of a kind of radical movement at the end here, so we'll see how that tracks. Things are slipping around a little bit here, but that's just part of the preview. And what we want to watch out for is those points that really kind of slide around a little bit too much, and we may need to delete them and move them as we kind of work on this. So basically if we move this back now, you should see most of your points moving quite nicely, but I can see one point here that's just kind of moving out of sync with where it's fixed to here. So I'm going to come to my selection tool and we can just delete that. Basically we're going to create a mesh on this, and we don't want that mesh to kind of be jumping around. It will distort our object a little bit. So you can see everything here looks pretty good. We've still got a kind of nice grid, and then we're just looking to see if any of these other points jump around a little bit out of that grid. So we'll go with that. We can come and kind of delete other points at any point in time. And what we'll do now is we're going to scroll down here, or we can actually stretch this out a little bit so we can see a bit more of this window. And basically, we're going to auto triangulate the mesh. And what that means is going to create the mesh where we're going to add our drop zone for our video. And we'll see how that works with this simple example here. So if we hit this, you can see it's basically made a mesh all the way around here. And if we zoom in a little bit here, we're going to keep our selection tool here. We can come around and kind of delete parts of this mesh that we don't think we need, where there might be issues that pop up, and we might see those when we put the drop zone on there. So basically, this is what's going to track. We can kind of, again, see the mesh. I can see a little bit of slippage here. This one is kind of moving out of position. So I'm going to delete that. And that's going to mean I'm going to need to auto triangulate the mesh again, but that should be okay. We can lose a couple of points in there for this kind of nice flat object, and it should be okay. You can see there's a couple of other points in there that are moving around a little bit. So sometimes when the points don't find a kind of clear spot to track, they can move around a little bit. So if we come down here again, we're going to toggle on the drop zone. And you can see the drop zone basically is this nice arrow at the moment, kind of a preview of the image that will eventually be in there, or the video. And you can see here now as we move backwards, we want to kind of see that arrow stay intact. So as we move forward here, you can see a little bit of distortion at the bottom of this arrow. And if we come back, we can see these points at the bottom here are kind of moving out of sync with some parts of this mesh. So this kind of whole bottom row here is moving a little bit out of sync, but actually it's going to be away from the kind of main part of the video, so I'm not too worried about it. Remember, we faded it away to the edge, so we'll just go along, and actually that looks pretty good. So once we've got our overall mesh set up, we can hit export data here, and that will take us back into the timeline where we can then actually add our video in. So we've got our drop zone here, kind of tracked with our coaster. And if we come right to the beginning here, this is where we kind of need to be kind of mindful of how we're setting this up. So if I select this, come right back to the beginning, I'm going to come up to my graphics here, where I've got this kind of transparent T-sip here. And basically with the playhead at the beginning here, so if we come up to our drop zone across on the right, you can see just as I'm picking up the cup of tea. So we can click here and then click apply clip. We're not worried about the scale of it for the moment. We can modify that in a second. So we can apply that clip. And now you can see we've got that video inside the coaster. So now we'll come up to our inspector again, and I'm going to drop down the scale. So you can see here now we'll drop down the scale, and you'll start to see why we added that fade around the edge. So now I can position this by using the y-axis, so it's a bit more central, tweak the scale a little bit, and eventually we'll hit the edges of our mesh. So I'm just going to leave it just before we start to touch that edge. And now if we drop down the opacity, we can either reveal the logo or kind of hide it in the background. And that is it. So now if we come back and play this through, you can see we've got that little bit of video playing back on this flat surface and working really nicely. So that works great. So we'll move on now to having a look at this water polo ball. So basically with this we can select it in a couple of different ways. I'm going to drag my surface tracker and drag it on here. And basically, again, we want to open up the editor and begin to do our tracking. So we're going to grab our circle mesh again, and if we just imagine where these two lines join, if we come out from the top and from the left, around about here, we can draw a mesh out, and it's going to map onto that whole ball pretty nicely. So now once we've got that there, we can track backwards to start with. So you can see here the point adjusts based on where it can find the edges. So we've lost a few of our kind of tracking points here, and this highlights how we need to modify and sort of adjust this. So you can see some of these points are dancing around a little bit. We'll need to remove some of these. And we can also, as we kind of move this around, if we see a few over here that are not really working, we can just drag around them all. We really don't want these dancing points anywhere in here. And we can turn on the track assist filter and ramp this up a little bit to find those edges. So now with something like this where the points are kind of specific, I might try and zoom in, and then actually once you've got the rectangle selected, we can also add our own kind of manual points. And I'm looking for little cracks in the edge here where there's a bit of a unique texture or a join in the line, such as across here, where we think we can get a good track from. So basically distinct points around our ball here. So we'll just grab a few more points. We want to put this video right in the middle here, so that's why we're sort of wanting to have more points around this central point. So we'll put some on the Mikasa here. So let's track backwards and see how those new points track. It's looking pretty good. So we'll come ahead here. In fact, we'll just track from the beginning. It's easier than finding the point where we left off. So I'm just going to stop this. We're going to add some more points down here. We don't have many tracking points down at the bottom here. So we'll track backwards first again. And again, we're kind of looking for those little points that are dancing around and kind of not staying in the same spot, but everything here now looks like it's tracking pretty well. So I'm going to grab my selection tool here and we'll just delete a couple of these that we spotted, and then we'll track forward again. Okay, let's turn off this track assist filter and we'll just move through here and see how it's tracking. So actually that's looking pretty good. We have a couple of dancing spots down here, so we'll just highlight those and delete them. I'll zoom out a little bit. We've got some points off the edge here which we don't need. Just tidy that up. And these two here. So for the most part this is looking pretty good. There's still a couple of little points where things are moving around a little bit. We'll see that when we add the mesh to it. So now we're going to add the auto triangulate mesh. Okay, and we'll just look at how this works. And again, we're looking for those kind of points which slide around a little bit. I think this might be one here. So we'll just take this one out. When you delete a point now, it will take off the auto triangulate mesh. So although we've got a little bit missing here, I think we'll still have enough kind of tracking to kind of get the movement. So let's have a look at the drop zone here. We'll toggle this on. And really we're looking to see if that arrow stays, for the most part, kind of intact. There's always going to be a bit of movement there. But also remember there's going to be movement in the video as well. So that's going to kind of help us a little bit. So that's not looking too bad actually. We're getting a little bit of distortion, but I'm kind of happy with that for this example. So we'll export the data here. And now we've exported that data, we can kind of see how this is going to move on the ball. It's looking pretty nice. And again, we can come back to the beginning here. So we're going to come back to the beginning here. We have this water polo player video already set up with the shape mask around it. So that's all ready to go. So basically, I'm going to position my playhead somewhere around about here. So we have a clip that is 8 seconds long. And so if I mark an in point here, so the range I've got selected here is about 10 seconds. So just make sure I've clicked to the beginning there. And so now I'm going to come to my clip. I'm going to select the source. And then we'll come up here again, just kind of select this point and then apply it. So again, with this, we're going to get that kind of video moving in there. And so you can see around the edges in some places a little bit of distortion. We're really focused in on this middle part. So we're going to actually drop the scale down for this video. And we'll reposition it. So we'll drop the Y down and then we'll push the scale back up a little bit. Actually, we're missing a bit of a big chunk of it over there. So let's just jump back in here. So we can always loop back into things, and we've basically missing a big section here. So actually, we do need to add in a point here that tracks well. So we'll just add another point there. It will take us back into the mesh. I'm going to try and add a point in here as well. So now I've added a couple extra points across here. Let's just try and track this again. And we'll try adding the triangulate mesh again. And it looks like we've kind of caught a bit more of it this time. So let's just see how that plays. So there's a little bit of kind of dancing across here. We'll just delete this one point out there, I think. And so now we're getting a bit more of a solid triangulate. So I'm going to go with that. So we're going to turn on our drop zone again and export the data. So once we've got that exported, you can see we've kind of filled that hole on the right a little bit. And now with the movement and everything there, although we're getting a bit of distortion, it doesn't really show too bad. But I am going to change where I actually start my video. So with my playhead at the beginning here, we're going to change where the video starts. I'm going to select the drop zone here. And then we're just going to move ahead to where his arm is right up. Apply that. Just so we get a bit more of that kind of full throw of the ball as this is moving. So you can see sometimes when you get that more extreme move of the ball, a little bit of the tracking gets lost, and we could certainly work on that to try and repair it, find some more spots that work well. But overall, I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so let's move on to our tote bag here. So we're going to add our surface tracker in a slightly different way. So I'm going to come up to my titles and generators here. And in our titles, we have an adjustment layer style surface tracker. So basically, we can drag this above our tote bag here. And actually, we'll shorten this up a little bit. Just want to get a couple of the bigger movements in there so we can see how this is working. So there's some nice kind of movements at the end there. Let's just trim this down a little bit. Okay, so we'll come to somewhere in the middle here. We can see the full kind of front of this. And this works in exactly the same way. So we're going to come up to our title. We can open the editor. And the advantage of this is that when we add the layer into our drop zone, we can turn off the background layer. So we can actually export out a transparent layer with just the kind of tracked image or whatever. So we're going to grab the rectangle here and just drag that around. And so we just want the kind of front of this. So we'll just kind of go for it and see how well it works. So we'll track backwards. I haven't added any adjustments to this or anything like that, so we'll just see how this works and then kind of go from there. So let's move this along. So we've got a pretty good track there so far. You can see everything's moving quite nicely. So we'll just come back to here and we'll track forwards. Okay, nice. So you can see we've got a pretty good track. This is kind of where we're going to place our image or our logo in the middle here. So I'm going to come to my selection tool and we're just going to tidy up some of these points at the bottom we don't need. So I can drag a marquee around them. I can select them and delete them individually. And just kind of go around and remove any extraneous points that we don't think we'll be needing for the actual mapping of that object. So you can see it's really responding nicely to the folds and everything when it kind of moves really subtly. We're not getting any distortion of the grid there as things move around. It's kind of holding in place really nicely. So let's add our auto triangulate mesh. And we'll just zoom in a little bit here. We're going to clean up some of these triangles up here. So we don't really need these. And we can zoom right in and use this hand tool to kind of move around. So we can delete some of these triangles across here. We'll just go back to our selection tool and we can grab some of these and just simplify the triangles that we have here. Sometimes they're a little hard to see. So let's zoom out here. We've added our mesh on there. Everything's looking like it's moving pretty nicely. And so now if we add our drop zone, you can see our drop zone looks pretty good. And then as we move around, we're moving with the material and the drop zone is for the most part staying intact. So let's export the data for that. So you can see now that mesh is moving really nicely. We are going to come back to our library here and we'll come into our test folder here where we've got some of the kind of logos that we're going to use on this. So basically with our surface tracker selected, we can come to our drop zone and we're going to select one of these two logos. So you can see actually even with the kind of super zoomed in version of my logo there, it starts to look really nice. We'll apply that clip, kind of moving with the bag. So you get big shot of my beard moving with the bag, which is kind of a bit weird, but it works quite nicely. We can modify the opacity of that, so we can drop it down a little bit to reveal a little bit of texture through, and then we can also drop down the size of this obviously and then offset it, so bring it down a bit, bring it to the middle, and we'll go down in size a bit more. Pretty good. So we can see there that we've got it nice and central. Now, I've got it nice and big on the bag. We could place it as a small logo on the bottom right or top left or something like that, but we'll just play this through. And you can see that starts to move really nicely with the bag overall. So we're getting that nice kind of real natural movement. Now, the nice thing about having the surface tracker in this layer rather than attached as an effect is that we can do a number of things. So I'm just going to hold down the Alt key and duplicate this. Okay. And then I'm going to disable the background one. So basically, a couple of things we can do here. So if I'm happy with how the track is working and everything like that, then I can do a couple other things. So actually we'll grab my logo from here. And I don't have any transparency on this logo, so I'm just quickly going to apply the shape mask here and we'll take off any feather on this. I'll round this off. So you can make transparency for objects that don't have any, and we'll just quickly line this up. Just eyeballing this, we could probably mathematically do it or have done it in Photoshop before we got here, but that is good. Okay, so basically now, click away from that. So if I come to this top version of my surface tracker, I'm going to grab this as my layer. And with this, you'll notice that it's on top of that kind of bag. We'll apply it here. So it's on top of the bag. It's a bit smaller than the other one, so we'll increase the scale up a bit here. And we'll need to kind of move it into position. So it's just a different size image. But you can see as we move it around, we get that same kind of nice movement that we have with the other image. It's that kind of nice fluid movement. Now, with this on a separate layer, if we go to File, New, and Compound Clip, and click OK, Once this is in a compound clip, if we're happy with how it's set up, let's just come up to our options here. We can start to use some of the blend modes, so we can overlay this to get some of the texture through. We could do a screen, and if you're familiar with any of these kind of lighten or darken or multiply blend modes, you'll know that they're useful, particularly in scenarios like this where we want to blend things in with that kind of background image. So you can see here we're getting that kind of nice blend of those colors there. It also means we can add our own color adjustment to that layer individually. So if we want to modify that, we can do, and it will change the way that it blends with the background, which we can't do when it's actually in the same layer. So we get this nice ability to kind of play with the color. We could add other effects to it as well. So if we wanted to perhaps add a colorize effect to this, then we can do that. It's still going to map as long as we don't move things around. So we still get that kind of nice movement of the logo. We can kind of chop and change it, so we can have different kind of colorize effects happening here. So I'm going to stick with multiply and these two colors here, but you can see how we get that kind of different blend than we get with the original one. So we get that kind of nice blend of the different colors and some interesting effects there as well. You can see we're also able to kind of overlay multiple images here as well. So I'm just going to delete this topmost surface tracker layer, and we'll just duplicate the original again. So if I come to my effect here, we'll jump in here and we'll grab from the graphics there, we'll grab this drinking a tea. So we can even place a video on our tote bag as well. So we'll apply that, and then we'll come and disable the background. So you can see we can even put a video on a bag as well. But you can see how we can have some fun with this. Use this to kind of brand different things, use this to apply effects things, or to create some different interesting effects in our videos. So hopefully that's a good overview of the Surface Tracker plugin from Pixel Film Studios. I've really enjoyed having a kind of first look and explore of this particular plugin. It's definitely got some real nice features in it. If you do have any questions about it, then leave them below. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you on the next tutorial.